Hello, everybody. This is Joe DeLore here, and this is the Analog Man Cave. Welcome to another show. So, the idea for this came from a question that Greg Stafford asked. He says, I did a video last week, and I said, are you not happy with One D&D or 5e or 5.5 or 6e or whatever it's called? I said, check out the OSR, and it got a whole lot of comments and views and traction there. So, Greg Stafford says to me in a question, do you have any suggestions for an adventure for a newbie who wants to try an older system where he has players who've only played 5e? And I have Fandolin here showing on the screen there because that's where a lot of 5e people started off in. So you're familiar with this. So the question is, how do you go from Fandolin to an OSR game? Right? How do you go from the starter set adventure to an OSR game? And it was really thinking about it. And then the next day, Erik Tenkar over at Tenkar's Tavern, he put up a great video that started a lot of conversation. He says the OSR is not what we remember it to be. How many sandboxes or hex crawls did you run? And I'm going to have the link for all these people I talk about in down below in the comments, so you could in the description. You can take a look at them. And Erik was saying that back in the day, he did it episodically. He just went from dungeon to dungeon, whether they bought a module. By the way, we used to call adventures modules back then. That's what. So if I keep saying module, it's just the old way of saying it. So we went from adventure to adventure, module to module, or somebody made something up, and that was it. It was an episodic thing, like an episodic TV show, right? Like the one didn't connect to the other. And then the Greyhawk Grognard, Joe Bloch, did a video on the same topic, inspired by Erik. And he says, "How did you play D&D back in the day?" And he talked about how Erik says he didn't really do sandboxes, but Joe says, yeah, they really did sandboxes, and they could do whatever they liked. Their plots evolved organically from the setting, taverns for rumors. They didn't do a mega dungeon with multiple players and groups and this and that. They had some small self-contained dungeons because they had to do it at study hall in high school or whatever, but they had free reign to go wherever they wanted to. And then Benoist Poirier, P-O-I-R-E. Sorry, Benoist, I cannot pronounce your last name. I've been talking with you on various blogs and whatnot for over a decade now. I still can't pronounce your damn name, man. But he did a video, and his link is below in the description. He says talking about the OSR is not like what it was back then. And he had the most interesting point of all that, because of course it agrees with me. So he says he doesn't want to play the OSR games back in the old days like they did. He wants to play OSR games now, the games themselves, but with the age and maturity and tools and his intellect that he has today. And he has a good definition. Basically, if it's derived from the OGL, the open game license, then it's OSR. But he doesn't want to play it the same way as we did in the 70s and 80s. All right. So and that's how I am too, because when I was thinking about what module or what adventure should you use, what should you start with? Do you want to go for some of the classics or some of the OSR new modules that might be considered a classic? What should you use to start with? And if you're just going to want to run a one shot, then yeah, do that. It might be a 2-game session thing, but if it's fine, whatever, you'll get the feel of it. But don't run it the same way we did back then, because honestly, we weren't that good. The modules weren't that great. They had sort of built-in ideas about how they should be run, and nobody did it the same, as you can see from these 3 guys here and myself. I mean, nobody did them the same, because if you didn't go to conventions, you just played with your own little group, and your own little group did it the way they understood it to be. So if your experience was in a tiny little bubble, you're doing it the way you think it should be done, because there wasn't a whole hell of a lot of instruction out there, right? There wasn't YouTube videos to watch on how to do this stuff. So a lot of the ways we did things were just not good. And I don't think that you should do an OSR game today the same way we did it in the 70s and 80s. You might want to run a module or an adventure just for the nostalgia's sake, to say you did it, the Tomb of Horrors or something like that, right? Or maybe Hamlet. But if you're going to run a real game, a real, more than a couple one shots, if you want to run a campaign, that's what I'm going to talk about with you today here. How do you do that? Okay. How do you take a 5e group and run an OSR style game with them? Right, but using sort of your modern techniques, and your, like Benoist says, your intellect, your knowledge, your skills, everything that you have right now. And before I go further, let me just throw out a shout out to Erik Tenkar has a new Substack, the Tavern Video Network. It's a group of channels. All right. It's me, myself, Erik, Greyhawk, Grognard, Matt Jackson, Rob Conley's coming up with one, and Eric's reaching out to get some more people in there. A video network, essentially. It's a newsletter. He gets emailed once a week, and he's going to do a recap. Here's everybody who's in this OSR video network that he's running, the Tavern Video Network, bunch of OSR channels on YouTube. You're going to get a link on what have they posted in the last week. So go to tenkarstavern.substack.com. Again, that link is in there. Anyway, back to this. Sandboxes, right? That's a one trope. Everybody played in a sandbox. No, we didn't. Nobody didn't know what the hell it was. A sandbox is the basic definition of a sandbox, I think, is, the players are in charge of what they want to do and where they want to go. But you really can't do that truly, because a DM can't be ultimately prepared for any possible outcome. You could use random encounter tables and whatnot, but you're never going to have a fully robust game if you do it just pure sandbox. All right. All you do is rolling from one random encounter to another as you explore one hex at a time. Usually, and that's the essence of a hex crawl, the other trope, right? The classic hex crawl is B1 in search of adventure. I never did that. It was a little bit before my time, and it's just kind of boring. It goes back to this West Marches campaign style, which I think is kind of boring. I like an immersion thing. I like to be part of a world. I like to feel my character is a part of a community. I like to have my PC's actions interact with and affect the world around them in some way. When they're lower level, it affects village level. When they're 5th, 6th level, it might affect, within a couple town radius. If they're higher level, it affects a region. Ultimate level affects a country. Ultimate levels, maybe even the world, depending on the type of campaign you're running, right? And that's kind of what I'm wrapping up now with my 5th edition game. They started in Phandalin, as you see here, and then they moved along, right? Now they're affecting the whole world. My next campaign, the 2nd edition, is going to be more of a regional thing, more dark and gritty, right? The other trope is a mega dungeon. The classic one from the old school days was Temple of Elemental Evil. Started out with the village of Hamlet in 1979, and then supposed to have the temple come out next year or whatever. It came out 5-6 years later. But that is the classic, Temple of Elemental Evil was a great, the first mega dungeon. Say people, argue about that because they argue about everything, but even that wasn't that great. It wasn't written well enough to explain how to make the best use of it. Different groups did it in different ways. How did I run them back in the day? We did pretty much like Erik did, episodic. It was me and my brother. We saved up money in our paper route. We went to the Walden Books and we sat in the corner. And after buying this shittiest of all modules ever created by a human being in any galaxy or universe known to man, which is called the Forest Oracle, never buy it. It sucked. After that, we would sneak the Walden Books, slice open the plastic wrappers, and read every module that we could just to get a sense of it, right? To get us, because the back doesn't tell you anything. We got the sense of what the module was, and then we picked it up if it was a good one with our paper route money, and then we played that. So essentially, our games were whatever module when we could afford a new module, we played a new game. All right, so that's how it was with us, though. Later on, after college and post-college days, we did campaigns. We didn't do them that well. We didn't have a good sense of how the real world worked. So we couldn't really have a good sense of how any fantasy world worked. We needed to have the basics, right? Like geopolitics and sociology and psychology and everything, all economics, how it all works, how it all hangs together. If you're interested in that stuff, look up Peter Zeihan. He does stuff on geopolitics. He wrote a book, The End of the World, something or another. It's a really interesting dude. Zeihan, I think. And then there's this other guy has a channel here called, I don't know, he calls himself the Baron Darop or something. He does really cool things about geopolitics within D&D settings, the geopolitics of Greyhawk or whatever it is, based on the geography and trade and everything else. He's an interesting guy. I like his videos, actually. But anyway, moving along, we tried to do campaigns because we bought the Dragonlance stuff, right? And so we wanted to run campaigns like one adventure leads to another adventure, and there's a story going on. But we ran into the problem of the DM trying to tell a story, right? And then it turns into a railroad, which is what Dragonlance effectively was. It was a railroad. You're acting out the books, and it even had ridiculous things. If the players do this, don't let them. It was ridiculous. And that, unfortunately, is what stuck, right? When, Pathfinder, this and that, you started with these adventure paths, which are kind of railroads. Even the 5e modules that are adventures that they come out with now, a lot of them are railroads, especially the Dragon one. That was terrible. The first one they came out with, it was just a 2-book railroad. It was bad. But what you're really looking for when you're running an OSR game, okay, is to avoid the railroads. OSR is a style and a feel. It's not a specific adventure. That's why I heavily recommended Matt Finch's old school primer in that last video. I'll link the last video in my description as well. You can take a look at it. It's a good intro to what I'm saying here. How to get started in the OSR and as running them. This is how to actually apply yourself and do it for the first time. So Matt Finch's old school primer gives you a sense of the feel of how to run a game as an old school style, as an old school DM, right? I think rather than give you a module, give you an adventure to run, is say, hey, what's my first adventure? I'm just going to say, make it up yourself. And here's how to do it. All right. And this is what I'm doing. I can only give you what I do. I don't talk in theory like some of these YouTube guys. You know, they can write a book on a theory of how to do every damn thing and write an outline and this and that. I don't do it that way. I can only tell you what I do. And this is what I'm doing right now. This is what I have done to set up my second edition game. All right. I'll probably have more videos detailing each specific step of this later, but this is what I've done. So you have Phandalin as a starting town. Steal it. Use it. All right. Just use it for your game. Steal something like Phandalin. You could have other places. Hamlet, for example. Let me hear. Like you get boom, boom, boom. Let's see. You have Temple of Elemental Evil, has the village of Hamlet in it, right? Perfect little village. All right. What are you looking for in a village? You're looking for, first, I think, draw map. Something simple like this. Okay. Like the map I'm using, I'm setting mine in Parnas. Parnas map in that module sucked. It was like 3 buildings. So I drew my own. This is it, man. I suck as an artist. This is the map I drew. You know, it has all the main things in there that you need. You know, you'll flesh it out as you go along later, but this is the basic map that the PCs are going to see on the screen. You know, I just took the picture. I took this picture and I scanned it into Roll20, and that's all it is. But if you want to use a fancy map like this or something else, you know, Matt, there's a lot of mappers out there. Matt Jackson does good maps. You know, just look around, just find a good map, or just draw it yourself. You don't need too much in terms of the map, because the essence of a city really is the NPCs. Okay, the NPCs that the players interact with define the city. All right, there are places they give you plot hooks, right? They give you a sense of place and intimacy and familiarity. I would highly recommend starting with a very small town, population in the hundreds, right? Because then you get a sense, the players get a sense that it's theirs and they want to protect it. Once they get to know the villagers and they have interactions with them that aren't related to the adventures themselves, right? They have like a sense of, I like these people, especially if you do it right as a DM, right? And put it maybe a bigger city to go and buy and sell stuff, I don't know, a week or so away, like Hamlet the Riverbank, several days, right? Something like that works. That way they could go sell. And good thing for a DM is that when they're gone, stuff happens. They're not there, stuff happens. That gives the PCs a sense that they're not the center of the universe. Stuff happens around them, right? Now, within the city, make a tavern map, something like that. Maybe 2 tavern maps, right? The good tavern, the bad tavern, right? The rough tavern, the city tavern. Every town has the place where the locals drink, and then the place where the foreigners, the strangers, the adventurers, whatever you want, drinks, right? And have some regulars in these taverns that aren't about the adventure, right? Have townies, have regular people in there that you could get just a sense that, like, for example, my brother, they have kids. In Phandalin, I had all these people in town. I created a bunch of them had their own kids, and then the kids started their own little make-believe adventure group, and they were 13 years old, and they're running around, and they got in trouble. They looked up to the PCs as their, heroes and this and that. The PCs had to bail them out. They fell in a hole. They explored a cave, got lost. They had to get, things like that to get a sense. You saved the kid. It's like that book, and I had to write a screenplay, Save the Cat. How do you make endearing heroes? Save the kid, save the cat, stuff like that, right? Another thing, have a place. Your one trope of old school play is NPCs, red shirts, right, from the old Star Trek days. People to hire. You don't have to have the guy who carries the shield or the porters or the torchbearers, but you might have a guy in there who says, you know what, I got a spirit I inherited from my father. I want to get out there and do something different to be a farmer. Can I go along with you? All right, kid. Yeah, hold the backpack, use your spear. I'll teach you the ropes. In the meantime, have some way to have the kid level up, to get some training over the course of a year or so. He becomes a first level fighter. He might be if that PC dies, boom, he has a backup PC, right? NPCs, but don't use them like red shirts, because the PCs will get a reputation that, hey, every time these people leave with a bunch of NPCs, they come back with money. NPCs are dead. What's going on here, right? They'll dry up, right? Next thing you need to determine about the PCs themselves is, where are they from? Are they from outside, or are they from the region or this town? If they're from the town, they need to be given some information about it, some context, some names, some history, right? So those PCs will start with a little bit more info than all the other PCs are from out of town. Whatever you do, this is a trope of 5e that you should not carry over to an old school game. Do not let your PCs write a big ass backstory, right? It's not what you do. It's not what you've written down. It's what you do in old school games. All right. Some players, they write these 5-10 pages of your backstory. Why don't you just retire? Your first level, you've done everything, seen everything, been everywhere. You're the most interesting character in the universe. I mean, Jesus Christ. No, you're just a person from a farm. I always start my house rules. The very first line of my house rules: you are a nobody from nowhere. don't give me any crap, right? And then what I'll do is, and I always break my own rule, but I never do it in such a way that the PC comes in with something that gives them built-in plot hooks or quests or missions or purposes in life or goals other than adventure, exploration, and discovery and having fun. All right, that's it. It's about that. It's not about being heroes and saving the world. It's more the swords and sorcery Conan style thing than the Dragonlance hero thing. Right? That's what you got to keep. All right, it's the exploration, it's the fun, it's the partying, it's the heavy metal hard rock lifestyle. It's Metallica. It's not Zamfir, the master of the flute. That's what we're doing here. Okay. Now, next thing, I get this from Tim Shorts over Gothridge Manor. All right. He did this with our group, and I thought it was fantastic, and I've been doing it ever since. Do a separate starting adventure for each PC as a DM, an hour or two. It helps them get a sense of place in the area. It gives them maybe some contacts. They might get a rumor, some mystery. Maybe each of the PCs in their starting adventure gets a little bit of a puzzle that, once they all sit there in the inn and start talking, combines into a plot hook for the first adventure. Maybe they would get an ally. Maybe they get an enemy, something like that, right? So now you got the town, you got the map of the town, filling in, not just the people at the bar. Like, I did a basic list of who would be in the village or a small town by profession. I got basic laborers, a tavern owner, cobblers, tailors or clothing makers, a groom or stable boy, a furrier, a weaver, a loom person, basket maker, wheelwright, wagon maker, miller, blacksmith, herbalist, apothecary, midwife, militia, miners, brewers, mead makers, wine makers, maybe a stonemason, tinkerers, beekeepers, acrobat, storyteller, minstrel, things like that. That'll, candle maker, baker, butcher, farmer, glass maker, launderer. That's the stuff that gives it a sense of like they're in a real place, right? You don't have to have a name for each of these people. But some of them you will definitely get a name as you go along. You don't need it ahead of time, right? And then maybe for each a couple of them, you might make them interesting, right? So maybe like here, I'm looking at the one I got for the baker, right? The standing orders from local businesses. She sells her pastries out of her own shop, but she'll also bake things like breads for the other businesses, right? And like the potter makes useful functional stuff, but she likes to paint pictures on them of various fairy creatures. She got a thing for like little fairy folks, so she paints them. Little details like that add a sense of like, all right, this is a real person, a real place, right? And if you can't figure out a personality, just grab something from your real life, a relative, a friend, somebody you know. Okay. Now, what you want to do next is, when you have the town, you're going to develop a region. All right. What I did was, here, let me see. I'll show you. This is my area that I'm doing this in next. I centered it on Parnast. I filled in a lot of gaps here. I created this region. Okay. And it's nice because what I liked about Parnast as a center, I steal the map. I drop a lot of stuff in there around it. It's got everything. You got fallen lands, you got moors, you got marshes, you got the Serpent Hills, you got mountains, you got plains, you got the Badlands over here, the Anarok Desert. A little bit of everything is here, right? You got a major trade route that in my campaign at least isn't in operation right now. You got some nomads out in the desert there, like Dune or something. Maybe you want to bring that stuff in. All right. So once you have your region, okay, give the region a history. All right. So in mine, you look down here in the Everesca, I have Grey Elf refugees settled in the Forgotten Forest, and in the Forgotten Forest, they keep to themselves. They're isolationists, but they have relations with the Wood Elves who live out there in the Forgotten Forest as well. I have some Wild Elves in the Weathercoat Forest. I have dwarves, of course, in the Grey Cloak Hills here. I made up a little dwarven town, a mountain dwarves. I got hill dwarves over there. I got some gnomes up here in Glindelstuden, right? So now I have these areas, right, for the various races. And then I just gave them a history of each place, and I gave them a culture. And I described the relations with the other towns and places. I figured out trade and economics. What do they make in each place? What do they sell? All right. The halflings are really good in pumpkins and gourds are their basic specialty. Everything is pumpkin, everything, pumpkin spice, pumpkins, pumpkin everything. It's like Halloween all the damn time over there, right? They make the best pumpkin beer, pumpkin spice beer. It's just everything is pumpkin. So, and then another area up there, the Cloud Barrows, they sell they raise small ponies, right? So little things like that. And then once you have what everybody makes, then you figure out, well, who are they going to sell it to? Because it has to make sense. Why would you have these things if you couldn't sell it? So there's a small regional economy, right? So that creates a basis of social interaction with them amongst all of these people. Even the Grey Elves come out sometimes at big festival to see who might be selling books, lost homes, or lore, things like that. And knowing that, people come up from Waterdeep maybe to sell to the Grey Elves, right? So you get some rumors from outside. Okay. Once you get this social interaction, you have trade economics, you have trade routes. Then you start creating this past history. You know what did they do? The Grey Elves hate humans? Why? Oh, because maybe the humans didn't help them defend Everesca. Who knows, right? Maybe the humans actually sacked Everesca. We don't know. All right, but create that stuff, and you might have alliances, you might have animosities between them, right? Then once you get the regions and the towns or cities or enclaves or whatever, you could have get a couple big NPCs that the players may encounter, probably merchants or something like the mountain dwarfs twice a year come out of their mountain hold and sell stuff and buy stuff in Parnast, right? And maybe at a trade booth. Trade booths are great places. They're good starting points to meet people. That's what's going to start off my campaign, a big trade booth, right? Now you got all these areas there, and now you have random encounter tables. Okay, so if you're going to be in a lonely moor, the marsh of Sheelenberg, you have a random encounter table, all right, and have 10, 15 things on each place. Now I'm going to say something that's a little controversial, is that I've moved on from random encounters a little bit. I do them ahead of time, right? I predetermine what the players will encounter. I make up a cool map. It makes it more interesting. It really doesn't make a difference in a sense if you roll up on the spot, you encounter 10 orcs, or if you choose from the list of things that they might encounter. Today, I'm going to give them 10 orcs on their trek, and I might drop it in on the first, second, third, fourth day, whatever. You might roll that randomly. But if you pick it ahead of time, you can make a little cool map that makes it interesting instead of like, oh, 10 orcs jumped you from the bushes. Well, yeah, again, that's just Tuesday, right? I mean, make it something interesting. You could take the time to create. Maybe the orcs have something interesting on them. Maybe they're coming back from a raid and they have a hostage or a prisoner that might lead into something else, a rumor. Maybe they found something that you don't know what it is once you loot their bodies when you kill them, right? You can make it tactically interesting too. You could create the terrain instead of just dropping them off somewhere on the road and the orcs come out from the bushes. No, you can make an interesting terrain like that, right? So I've moved away from random encounters for the most part, and Tim turned me on to that too. Again, Tim Shorts. You could always do a mix, or just as long as it makes sense for the area. You can do some random, some predetermined, whatever you want. Just make it make sense for the area. You're not going to have serpent men in a desert, right? So things like that don't make a hell of a lot of sense. Now, the other thing you want to have in there are one-offs, right? Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes a hole in the ground, just a hole in the ground. Sometimes they have no connection with anything else. That goes back to the old days of modules, right? So right now, what we have a hex crawl with these random encounter tables, right? We have sandboxiness with tons of rumors, tons of things going on, set up from all these things you created. Now you have your modules, your one-offs, your episodic stuff. And it's just a cool place to go explore. That's a good time to insert anything cool that you found. Maybe an OSR dungeon you picked up somewhere. Somewhere, maybe something in a zine or whatever. Look, check out Tim Short's Gothridge Manor Patreon. You get tons of free stuff there. If you're a member, you can download everything if you're free. It's really amazing. Hundreds of different things. Quick one-offs, 5-room dungeons, things like that. You could also have a mega dungeon. The two best mega dungeons, the one I think even better than Temple of Elemental Evil, which I've run and played it multiple times, reskinned for different purposes. The best old school one I think is Caverns of Thracia by Janelle Jaquays. And I think the best new one is called Barrow Maze. Greg Gillespie. Barrow Maze gets a little bit boring because you're looking at a lot of more undead, another sarcophagus, blah blah blah. But you know what? Here's what you do with mega dungeons. Here's how to make them not boring. Okay, you have competing groups. Once word gets out that something like Caverns or Barrow Maze is discovered, there's no group's going to be able to go in there, kick ass, come back. Because again, old school games, you're not healing up overnight. You're not getting long rests and just, you got hit points, all of them back. Next day, everything's ready. No, you got to go back to a town. You got to sell your stuff. You got to rest, recuperate. You're only getting back a couple hit points a day. And so what happens? You're back in town with a big haul. Other adventurers come through. They, where'd you go? When the rumors get out there, maybe your NPC that your hireling blabs or whatever, and they go out and do a raid, right? And then by the time your players go back out there again, there's less to get, right? So it gets the adventure. It makes this place a living, breathing environment, right? You have less incentive to sit on your ass, but at the same time, old school, you got to sit on your ass for a while. But when you go back, the dungeon has now changed. What you thought was there before, that's now blocked off, or now it's orcs have taken over. Maybe then the other PC group has set up a little barrier to getting in, and you have to figure out another way in, something like that, right? So it makes it interesting, right? And from this is the key phrasing here, I think, is what you call emergent storytelling. That's where you get your true sandbox. Is the story is emerging from the character's actions. But the key to an emergent story game is you need the sandbox, you need the environments, you need the NPCs, you need the past history. Now, here is the thing that's going to hurt your brain in a sense, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This place needs a history, all right? Not just a past history, a future history, all right? Now, no, it's not a railroad. I know what you're saying. You don't want to railroad the characters. Your job as a DM is to write the history of the place, the region that you're doing this in, okay? You need to write the past history and the future history. The players write their own history. That is the essence of emergent storytelling. It's the essence of a true sandbox. The story emerges from the character's actions. Their story emerges from their actions. However, it interacts with the story of the region that is going on right now. That means you need to figure out if the player characters weren't there. So you've created an entire ecosystem, right? This entire region here, Parnas, the Weathercoat Forest, the Lonely Moor, the Greyhawk, all these settlements that I've created, one for every race, they are a living, breathing environment. They're an ecosystem. And there are things that are going to happen there based on what I've written down, regardless of if the players ever visit or not. I could write a whole future history of this place over the next year or two. And that's what I did. I wrote down everything that's going to happen over the next year and a half if the characters never show up. All right. And then I chart that. I put it on a month by month basis, and some things I break down on a week by week basis. And it's like a calendar. I created the tables of like a calendaring book, and I figure out what's going to happen. And then I drop the characters into this place. Now, this place has a story that's going on. Okay. And this area has a story that in my head is going on, and it's all written out. Now, as the players do things, all right, that interacts with, as they get higher level, that interacts with the story that's going on for the whole region. Okay. It may affect anything or everything. All right. It could be that they help piss somebody off or help somebody, right? Which pissed another person off. Other NPCs in the region, other regional rulers take notice of the players, and they may change up their plans accordingly. They may reach out to them to be allies, or they may like I said, may have made enemies of Everesca or something like that, right? Then the players, once this happens, you have true immersion. Now, the key to this is that the players' actions have to be able to change your calendar. They have to be able to change your future history, or else it is a railroad. It's not a sandbox. All right. So the players are writing their own story. The DM writes a story of the region, the town, to a certain extent, the world around them. All right. And as these two things interact, that is emergent storytelling. That is what D&D is. This is a sandbox in a much more realistic and mature style. The players can do anything. Their actions have consequences and affects the living, breathing world. All right. So in this, what I just described to you, what do you have? You have a couple mega dungeons, maybe small locations, wherever you want them. They aren't the focus, though. All right. These characters now have some episodic adventures. They have hex crawling. They have a sandbox. All right. They have everything in the old school, but we're all older now, right? We're not 14 anymore. Most of us, probably people listening, they're judging by my my listeners. Yeah, you're 40 plus, right? So you have a smarter sense of how the world works and how people work and how societies work, social interactions, economic interactions, everything, right? You know how everything goes. So insert all of your knowledge into your campaign, and the players will feel like they don't want to leave. They're in a real place, right? It's not just a game. Then it becomes a almost an escape place, a place they want to go to. It becomes a real happy place. Coin a phrase. So the more you can do that, the better your game is. Now, no railroad, all immersion, and keep in mind all of the principles that Matt Finch talks about in his old school primer, and you'll run an old school game in with newer mechanics and newer ideas using old school rules, and with a more mature idea of what you want to do. Okay. The other tip I'll give you is always keep a notebook and write down ideas. I set up a contact for myself on my phone, or I text myself ideas all the day. And every weekend I'll go through and look at all my texts that I sent myself, and I'll write them down and fill in blanks. And maybe it might be a little bit of the history of the region. It might be a new NPC. It might be an idea for a house rule, whatever that may be. I just write it down and I add to it. And so you're growing, you're thinking about it. It forces you to think about it instead of just sitting at a computer once a week or, an hour a day or something like that. Your mind is always going. So that makes it interesting for you too, as you go along. Okay. So anyway, that is a very long video on how to run your first OSR game or campaign. All right. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this long. And please do me a favor and click like, subscribe to the channel if you can. It helps with the algorithm, and comment, throw me a thumbs up, but just share the thing out there. If you like to share with somebody who might be interested in it. Okay. I appreciate everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.